So for this guide video on the killers, I'm going to be calling them the killers, I'm not calling them the family, but for this guide on the killers of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we're going to be ranking these guys 1 through 5, and I'm going to explain a little bit of reasoning behind them. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is I have it in the title, No Build. There's a couple of important reasons why I have it listed as No Build. We're just going to be rating the killers. You see, I have Hitchhiker fully kitted out. Hitchhiker's my favorite to play. But we're not going to be rating them off of their full builds, because Hitchhiker without attributes assigned plays very differently to Hitchhiker with attributes assigned. Same thing with perks. The only thing we'll cover a little bit is the power, getting the power at tier 3, but I don't want to cover perks. I don't want to cover grandpa powers. I don't want to cover attribute assigning. We're just going to look at them at the base value and rank them 1 through 5. Now, one thing I want to mention is that all of the killers in the game are very unique. Every killer here has a role. Every killer here is good and playable. So when you say 1 through 5, it's not like, you know, whoever's at 4 and 5 aren't like completely unplayable. It's your choice whether or not you want to play them. So if you're wondering what the rules are, Bubba's mandatory to play. You can't play without Bubba. Leatherface is the brute of the team. He's high savagery, high endurance base. What he wants to do is he wants to use the chainsaw. He's doing the most damage to individual survivors, and he's breaking barricades and crawl spaces to make it harder for survivors to move. Cook is the tracker of the team. What he does is he uses his hearing ability to locate close-range survivors. His endurance is low, meaning he's not good in chases and over long distances. His savagery is high, meaning he does higher damage per swing. So he's kind of a glass cannon in terms of chase potential. One thing that he has, in addition to his hearing tracking ability, he has padlocks that he can put on doors that have already been opened and relock them. He is a killer that does not get a lot of value until the survivors are out of the basement. Once they're out of the basement, he can do some more work. Hitchhiker is a chaser. His job is to chase and pursue survivors. He's one of the 2 killers in the game that can go through survivor areas. He can go through crawl spaces, he can go up and down ladders, he can go through shimmy spaces. So he's able to chase survivors reliably. Because he chases survivors reliably, he has higher endurance, but lower savagery, meaning he can stay in chases longer, but does less damage in individual hits. He also has traps that he can lay out that when they catch a survivor, they force them to be broken out of. Now, they can disable them ahead of time, which doesn't give you a notification. However, these traps are very good for survivors that aren't paying attention or survivors that are just in a rush. So these make him a pseudo tracker. He can do some tracking. He's not doing the tracking to the degree that the 2 dedicated trackers are, but he can act as a last line of defense. One thing that's important to note on Hitchhiker is, as a Hitchhiker tip, you don't want to trap all of the exits. Like, your goal shouldn't be, oh, I'm going to put a trap on car battery, I'm going to put a trap on the generator, I'm going to put a trap on the pump. You can do that, obviously, but what you want to do is you want to focus on trapping entrances coming out of the basement if the survivors are taking too long to get out of the basement. Then you can go around, and once you know they're out of the basement, you can put traps around exits. Johnny is a dedicated tracker. Johnny's main strength is his ability to hunt footsteps, to follow survivors. He can't do it when they're in the tall grass. But if they're just walking or running out into a field or something, he can apply immense pressure and track survivors down. He's not as good as tracking survivors as Cook is, but his tracking is easier to use, and it's more reliable for pinpointing if a survivor is in the general vicinity. One thing about Johnny that's good, a lot of people don't like his power, but his raw stats are good. He's high savagery, high endurance. This means that he is able to maintain chases and dish out pretty good damage. He's relatively high savagery, means his individual hits can do a lot of damage. Endurance-wise, his higher endurance means he can stay in chases a lot longer. This makes him an interesting character in that he's kind of the basic character on the killer side. But his stats lend him to being a very aggressive basic type survivor without much work. The last killer is Sissy. Sissy is a chaser. She has average endurance and low savagery. Now, she has a lot of blood harvesting. Her goal is to run around and do blood harvesting. This would, in theory, make her a weaker killer. A lot of people think she's the high-end killer. Her power is poison. Now, this is multifaceted. She can use it in a one-on-one scenario on survivors to confuse them, disorient them, and get easier hits in. She can lay these poison traps around, lasting a decent time. They block off entrances. They notify her if she goes through them. And she can poison individual pickup locations. While this is kind of misleading. And I'll explain it when I explain her power. But one of her main strengths is that she is a chaser. She does very well at chasing. She follows the same paths as survivors. Again, same thing as Hitchhiker. She can chase the same pathways that Hitchhiker can. So ladders, crawl spaces, cutaways, like slip-throughs. She can't do barricades. This makes her, again, reliable for chasing down survivors, but less reliable in finishing them off. That's the overview for everybody. Now we can get into the details a little bit more as to the difference. Explaining and ranking them quite simply is going to go like this. Johnny's 1. Bubba's 2. Hitchhiker's 3. Sissy's 4. Cook is 5. Now, the gap between 5 and 4 is medium. The gap between 4 and 3 is very small. The gap between 3 and 2 is medium. And the gap between 1 and 2 is very small. So let's work backwards. Cook is the weakest. The reason why Cook is the weakest is the lower base endurance really holds him back. If you look at his power, the thing you have to look at is that tier 3 is where he really gets value. All family highlighting a victim is the main thing. That is the main part of his power that you want to choose, because that means you can play Cook more expansively. You don't have to be as reliant on having a teammate nearby. If you're above ground and you're tracking somebody below ground, Bubba in the basement can take advantage. Outside of that, you don't have an accurate way to help. So without the tier 3 ability, he really becomes useless. In addition to this, his padlock ability is not usable until the survivors have gotten out of the basement. Sure, lockpicking is harder if there's no lock on the door, or if there's an extra lock on the door. There's no reason to do that, though. Your main goal is to lock a door, and when the survivors come through that door thinking, oh, it's already been locked, they have to pick it again. he can be very good at closing off chasing lanes that the survivors think are open. However, he is terrible in chase. The 10 endurance kills him because it means all his points that you spend have to go into endurance. In the beginning of the game, what holds him back is that he can't place padlocks. If his power is not tier 3, he can't track. So that means he has to run around and get blood. And he can't run for very long between blood buckets and getting Grandpa up early. For every killer in this game, except for Hitchhiker, their goal, if they're at the top, if they're not Bubba, they want blood and they want to get Grandpa up. Now the survivors, 90% of the time, are going to be running a Connie. Connie's auto pick means she can just insta open a door and get up. So the other killers obviously don't have to get Grandpa up. But if Bubba's doing a good job in the basement, or the survivors just are dilly-dallying too long, their goal should be, I want to get blood, I want to get Grandpa up so that we can come down and help if need be, or so that we have better detection. Cook is not good at that early game. Where Cook excels is that mid to late game, and that can kind of work to the survivor's advantage. Killer's advantage is very early rather than very late, in my opinion at least. At 4 is Sissy. Sissy's power is pretty hard to explain. So she can blow clouds of poison that block their paths, which are good for limiting their lanes. And she can use it in chase. She can also trap objects. However, at tier 3 is where you have to get the poison. The poison being applied to bone scraps and toolboxes is nice, but it's not great. The poison being applied to generators and car batteries is useful because it means that now you get detection on all the traps. However, and this is a big however, these are tier 3 abilities once again. If a killer needs their ability at tier 3 to really be usable, that puts them at the back of the list, alright? And as an example, I've been playing Hitchhiker. Hitchhiker's my main killer, okay? I played a little Cook, I played a little Johnny, I played a little Sissy. I don't play Bubba, I have a dedicated Bubba main. But I played him in custom match, right? Hitchhiker is my solo killer. And you see, he is just barely at level 2. Because of that, it takes a lot of work to get a killer's power up to tier 3. And if your power strength is determined, this is the reason why Sissy's a little bit ahead of Cook. Now, one thing with Sissy, her being a chaser is very good. Points-wise, you do have to spend points into endurance and savagery. You need her savagery at least 25. That's 15 points. That means you really only get 10 points in endurance. If you don't put the points into savagery, she really struggles. At minimum, I would say is 10 points into savagery. Her blood harvesting is higher. So obviously what you want to do is you want to run perks that are based around blood harvesting, like Blood Runner, which is good. And you want to be running around chasing survivors a lot. However, she's not actively good at any one role unless you learn how to use the poison effectively. The poison clouds in her power are much stronger than the actual poisoning of objects until you hit tier 3. Then poisoning objects is great because you can either shut down toolboxes topside, so or objectives to keep survivors from getting out. In my opinion, her value is really good for the chasing aspect rather than the power aspect. Now, Hitchhiker is at 3. Hitchhiker is at 3, even though I like Hitchhiker, he's my favorite playstyle. There are obvious drawbacks to Hitchhiker that I want to explain a little bit. And also, I don't think he's better than Johnny. And Bubba has to be top 3. Now, I think the Hitchhiker is only a little bit better than Sissy. Just a little bit. So it's not fair to put Hitchhiker at 2, Bubba at 3, because I can't drop Bubba any lower than 3, and have Sissy and Hitchhiker with this big gap. I don't think Hitchhiker is that much better than Sissy. So let's talk about, he has no secondary use on his power. It's just trap. Right? Because Sissy can poison objects, or she can have poison clouds. Cook has the padlocks, but he also has the hearing. And because, like, you're kind of split 2 and 2, that can be problematic. Now, Hitchhiker has higher base savagery, and I believe he has higher base endurance. Does he? Hold on. Yeah, he has higher base endurance than Sissy. So, his point distribution is a little bit better. Because again, you don't really need to focus on blood harvesting. And like I said, the 2 stats you're always going to be leveling on a killer are really going to be savagery and endurance. It's just how you split it that changes. At least most of the time. Why is Hitchhiker higher? His traps are just simply more useful. You will always spawn, as Hitchhiker, you will always spawn at either generator or car battery. Exit. Meaning, you can trap the generator, you can trap the car battery, and leave. A lot of newer players will trap the doors. A lot of newer players will trap the door, the exit door itself. I've learned to go away from that. I've learned you trap gen, you trap car battery, you keep a trap in your pocket that you put at a ladder. Sometimes 2. And you check the doors as you're patrolling topside. Hitchhiker is an interesting killer in that he's always supposed to be topside. He should never be downstairs in the basement unless he's gotten enough blood and woke up Grandpa before the survivors did. If the survivors haven't woken up Grandpa by the time his blood is full, you can go down. Hitchhiker's best bet is to run around topside, like Sissy, check the doors to generator and to car battery, make sure they're locked. Check the entrances of the ladders where the survivors come up. And feed Grandpa. That's your goal. When they come topside, you chase them. If you notice on this build that I have well, because my goal is simple. If they come topside and I'm alone, and I don't have another teammate to help me finish them, I'm going to chase them to a well. What are they going to do? They're going to fall down the well, they're going to take damage. He's also better because of how his traps work. You can set trapped as an extra nuisance, because it forces the survivor to either get bone scrap and stab it, run a perk, which Connie's really the only one that runs it, or step in it. That's your options. If you run bone scrap to stab it and break it, you got 1 lockpick. If you dismantle my trap, I can patrol. If you don't disarm my trap, you can't do the objective. Now, at tier 3, the only one that really matters is this one here, where the activated trap is highlighted for all family members. What that means is that you don't have to run this perk, Dinner Bell. But any killer can run Dinner Bell. So if you know you're playing with a Hitchhiker, you can run Dinner Bell just to get the advantage off of it. However, that's not really going to detract him, because in my book, because that power isn't necessary, the usefulness of the trap is slowing down survivors exiting. That means you get a lot more surveillance on the survivors, because you can trap certain parts of the map, and most of the time, they won't be paying attention. You can trap crawl spaces or cutaways if you know you're going to be chasing, and if they're trying to sneak through and they step in it, it's free surveillance, it's free damage. That being said, the lower savagery, meaning he can't finish chases very well, and the fact that he only has chasing and tracking upstairs to make him useful. Now, Bubba is number 2. I don't think Bubba's the best killer in the game. Bubba has some problems a lot of people negate. Now, you always have to have a Bubba, and Bubba takes some getting used to, because he's not like any other killer in the game. He doesn't get the ability to freely swing on survivors if he wants to. Come on up, Ken. He has to rev chainsaw. You have to learn how to use your chainsaw as a Bubba. If you can't do that, you can't play Bubba. You have to have a Bubba start. Meaning, you'll be in situations sometimes if you don't like you're going to be of your other killers. Hey, somebody's got to play Bubba. Now, it's not hard to use Bubba per se, but some people really don't like maintaining. You can also run quiet, where Bubba doesn't use his chainsaw, and you have to rev it instantly. You have to try and rev it up. Now, one of the things I want to discuss on Bubba, why he's not 2 over 3. At tier 3, where the chainsaw starts instantly, is a big deal. Every Bubba wants to get their hands on this, because it means you can now play Silent Bubba. Another annoying thing that you have to know that needs to get fixed. When Grandpa gets woken up, Bubba's chainsaw deactivates. You gotta re-rev it. Bubba also has to keep his chainsaw revved the entire game. Your chainsaw is up, you have to keep revving it and keep it up. If you let it go cold, you have to restart the chainsaw. If you're not tier 3 on that ability, I have a Bubba that's level 10. They've been playing nothing but Bubba the entire game. The entire time they've been playing, they're nothing but Bubba. They're still not at tier 3 on the chainsaw. Another thing that's annoying about Bubba that a lot of people don't understand, his stat distribution is very good. Okay? High savagery, high endurance. You can immediately max, with 25 skill points, you can max him, savagery, endurance, top tier chase Bubba. Here's the thing that you have to understand with Bubba. He is terrible in a chase because of the fact he does not have the mobility the chasers do. He can't use crawl spaces. He can't use ladders, which even Cook and Johnny can use ladders. They're not as fast, but they can use them. Bubba can't even use a ladder, meaning getting out of the basement at the start, he's got to go through a door. That's his only option. And he's stuck in that basement until Grandpa gets woken up. Another thing with Bubba, in terms of the lack of mobility, is that his stamina isn't really an issue because he's using the chainsaw and the chainsaw causes lower stamina usage. However, big however, you're always using stamina as Bubba because you're always running around. He's not number 2 because he doesn't have that mobility that the other characters have. He doesn't have the chase potential. Now, he's the big hitter. He's the damage dealer. So he's going to be the one that's responsible for getting kills on swings. But he works best as a cutoff person, getting in front of survivors and whacking them if there's a chaser behind them. If you're playing Cook, Johnny, Bubba, you're hitting very hard, but you're not chasing a lot. You have to use the double tracking and be on comms to cut off. This means that Bubbas are nearly unplayable in solo queue unless you're just god tier Bubba and it's, look, I'm gonna one tap you with my chainsaw build. Just remember that when you're playing Bubba. He's the best killer in the game for killing, but his chainsaw and limited mobility is why he's not number 1. I have Johnny at number 1. Johnny has very high marks for his base stats. The balance on endurance and savagery is very good. Because what this means is that out of the gate, he's strong at chasing, and he's strong as a cutoff man. If he gets in front, 1 or 2 swings is half a character's health bar. If he's in a chase, he has enough endurance where he's not going to run out of steam, and he can probably get 1 or 2 hits in if the survivors their stamina wrong. So why is he number 1? The main advantage is the strength of the footprint tracking. All of his advantages at level 1 and 2 are very good. Meaning, Baby Johnny doesn't have to work very hard to get value out of tracking. He can pop his power real quick and say, oh, I have footsteps. And then go out. If you look at his tier 3s, analyzing clues faster, color of footprints for how recent they are, or the range of the footprint trails. None of these are very game-breaking for identification purposes on a Johnny. What he's good at is early to mid-game, once the survivors are out of the basement and are running around in that mid-game, he can go, okay, survivors are here, and start looking around. He can kind of pinpoint where you need to work. If another killer loses, Johnny can come over and say, okay, I see here, here, and here, let's go. The downside to Johnny is this. His power doesn't actively hinder survivors in any way. He doesn't have traps, he doesn't have locks, he doesn't have poison, he doesn't have a chainsaw that can cut down the barricades and the crawl spaces. What Johnny does do is track. Maybe not track as well as Cook. Cook's is better when you know how to use it, but it's better on comms. And he hits hard. Max Savagery Johnny can 2 or 3 tap any survivor. Except Anna with her power. Anna with her power, Max Savagery Johnny's like a 4. I think it's 4 tap. But in my opinion, what makes him the most well-rounded, he's the most well-rounded, he's the best for solo queue, he works well in team play. He's not an essential character where you have to have him. We've been playing Sissy, and we've been playing a lot of Sissy Hitchhiker combos. But he's just very good at being a nuisance and being on survivors all game.